On this episode of Three Cups and a Dash of Spirituality, we are going back to the Sallie House for one final investigatory experience with Bonnie D'Angelo, owner of Spellbound Mystics. So tune in and let's play the music. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Three Cups and a Dash of Spirituality. I'm Stacy, and I'm here with Carissa.
Hello, everyone.
And Michelle.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited about part 3 of the Sallie House.
I am as well. And today we actually have another special guest. Bonnie is joining us as she was also part of the experience at the Sallie House. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi, guys. Good to be here. So happy about this, and just talking about it is bringing up so much. So yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah, I'm glad you're ready because I'm ready. I'm loving this because I love to hear the different aspects and perspectives from each person that was present. So I'm going to kind of invite you to just jump into your story, and I'm going to interrupt with questions as we go. I want to hear from your perspective, how things unfolded.
For sure. So it began with me looking on YouTube's. I love true crime. I like serial killers. So I was looking through all those videos, and then the Sallie House video popped up, and I'm like, what's this? Who's Sallie? What's this? I dove into a video about the Sallie House, and I was captivated, and I wanted more. So I watched more videos. I listened to more podcasts, and Michelle is another fabulous lady who loves true crime. So I was talking with her about it, and I don't know what it was. I'm like, they let us stay there overnight. Maybe we should visit and see what this is all about. So it was like kind of like that feeling of, I want to go visit. I want to stay and see what happens, what's going on, what's the real story here. So I kind of just, I don't know if I talked her into it. She's like, okay, yeah, this sounds great, but I could feel a little bit from her, but I'm like, I really think we should go. So we made the reservations, we made the arrangements, and then we're like, well, maybe Carissa wants to come. And Carissa said, no, I'm not going to stay overnight in some haunted house. And
well,
I'm like,
Carissa needs a 5-star hotel, so
I get it. So with that being said, I know there was some talk between Michelle and Carissa about going to New Orleans instead, or doing something else. And I felt like that would be cool. I would love that too. But I'm like, no, really, I need to go to the Sallie House. And so we just ended up going, and then I got a call from Michelle. Carissa wants to come. And then we're like, well, maybe Bo would like to come. So it was kind of like we just piled on and just kind of kept going that way. So we made the arrangement, we showed up, and it was walking into that house after all of the stuff that had already happened before we got there. I could tell that whatever was in there did not want us there, because they were starting to scare us and try to deter us from going. But I'm going
to interrupt you with a question. Yeah. When you say whatever was in the house didn't want us there, what did that kind of, how did they demonstrate that?
So the first thing that happened, if I can recall, we were in the Chamber of Commerce, and they are the ones that run the tours and the visits. We would try to check out with some Sallie merch, and the registers went down. And it was about the time that we were to check into the house. So that was our first synchronicity that came through, where it's like, okay, what's going on here? Then we tried to get into Bo's car, and 2 in the front, 2 in the back. Middle seat was empty, but when we started going, that seatbelt notification started going off. So it's like, somebody's right here. So we plugged in that seatbelt, it went off, and then I tried to take it off again, and it kept buzzing and beeping. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if no one's here, then Bo's got a problem with her car. But turns out that there was no issue with the car after this was all said and done. So there was somebody in that car with us, and I feel it was somebody that was a protector for us. So that made me feel a little bit protected, a lot protected. So what else happened? We were checking out, we were going to get some groceries and some snacks and stuff. Bo was sliding her, the stuff, scanning everything, and then all of a sudden the cash registers just shut down. So I'm like, what is going on? There was a lot of stuff. And then we got to the house and it felt like a wall, but going in, it felt like a wall. So it felt like a wall. It's almost like I had to peel open this wall to step into the house. Once you stepped in, I heard all of you talk about how heavy and just how mucky and just yucky it felt. And it did. It felt like you were stepping into like a room full of jello or something. It was really weird. And instantly I had goosebumps and my hair was standing up. I've never ever felt, I've had goosebumps and tingles, but the whole arm hair was standing at end. And I'm like, you know, it was just like they were trying to say, hey, we're here. Listen to us. You just don't come in. Don't come in. It felt very much like they were trying to keep us out. It was like 4 o'clock and all this activity was happening. So I'm like, what's going to happen when it gets dark? So of course it made me feel a little bit like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So it was really weird. I had been into haunted places before. Never, ever have I felt so much physical sensations.
What a way to start the show, right? Like what a way to just start the experience. So after you finally got in, how did things unfold from your perspective?
Well, we got in there, we toured the house, we put our stuff down, all of the stuff that we brought. We went room to room, just kind of seeing what's going on. Carissa right away had this vision of this gentleman who was there, and she shared that with us. And we could tell that this person wasn't very nice. You could tell that there was just a lot of hate and a lot of anger and a lot of resistance within the house. But we went right upstairs, and tumbled, and I was right behind her. I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened? Were you okay? And she's like, yeah, I totally got pushed from behind, and she buckled. She was fine. She sat on the ground. So of course you think, oh, well, that was interesting. And right at the top of the stairs, there was a ball there, a ball. And I'm thinking, well, someone must have placed it there to see if it would get pushed down the stairs. So Michelle was there with the ball by her foot. I think she was getting ready to take a picture to see like what position the ball was, because we were going to leave again and come back and see if it had moved. But doesn't that ball just magnetically roll to her feet? Mm-hmm. And she jumped back as if like, I thought it was just scared her, but there was an electric shock that she felt coming through. But it was like, what happened there? We tried to recreate it. So we put the ball back and we put a foot back next to it and it doesn't move. We tried to jump on that space to see if the ball would actually roll. It doesn't move. So it was, I wish we had had that on camera, but it was a very, very cool. It was cool for me, not so much for Michelle, probably. It was probably quite frightening. But so after that, we toured around that the upstairs, and we were in the master bedroom. And I think Carissa again felt or saw the presence of this man again, and just explaining and describing him, and talking about his demeanor and how he's laughing at us, and something about his boots. And so we're sitting in this room, just kind of like, okay, what now? What now? So I'm trying to remember what happened after that, but I think Michelle and Carissa started checking to see about murders or what could be here. And it kind of like blossomed into this story of a serial killer, and the boots of a serial killer was very significant, just like what Carissa had explained about the gentleman that was in the house. There's something very significant about these boots, and that's exactly what we found. Well, the two of them found when we were looking through the killers or serial killers in the area.
So what's interesting is this is kind of tying into what you said immediately whenever you started sharing the story, is this you have this interest in true crime, the podcast. So this kind of comes into that psychic investigative piece. So can you walk us through how you were able to connect everything at the Sallie House?
Well, a lot of that serial killer and psychic investigation came from Michelle. She had such a strong connection with this person that came through, and I think I don't even know how to explain this, but it's almost like Carissa needed to see what she saw and felt, and then I needed to be there to bring everybody in, and Michelle put the pieces together for this person that we believe was there. So it's like this little steps. It was interesting.
And you were able to continue like finding those connections even after you left the Sallie House, correct?
Yes, there's a lot. I guess this serial killer killed a family in Kansas, and the wife's name was Bonnie. And I believe the murders happened on my birthday. Also, the killers were in Miami at one point, and they traveled US 41 from Miami to Vegas, and US 41 goes right through Fort Myers where I am. So that just, it felt all too real. It just felt like this, you can't, wow, how does this happen? I know there were more connected to Michelle in Vegas, but yeah, there was a huge connection.
Many connections to just finally ignore. So kind of back to your experience though, because I definitely want to hear your perspective from the Earth keepers as well. So please continue from
Yeah, sure. So we got there at 4 o'clock. All of this stuff happened during that time between 4 and 7. We decided to leave. We went and got some dinner, and we arrived back. It was about 8 o'clock, and activity had just stopped. It was like, okay, what's going on? What's going on? So we kind of we did our spirit boxes. We did some EVPs. We kind of talked. We found that there was a little boy in the space. I believe there was another gentleman or another woman there. I can't completely remember, but the little boy definitely came through strong. But the thing with the spirit boxes and the communication, the serial killer, the main guy that was running the place would stop others from communicating with us. So that, I think that's why our communication was low and light. There was one time when Carissa and Beau were both holding this guy out of the room, and at that point, I think that's when this little boy came and sat down with Michelle. And there's a lot of emotions there. You could really feel the connection with her and this little boy, and we just knew that we had to send him home. Yeah. So that all happened, and then we went and sat down at the table in the dining room, and it was like 11 o'clock. Oh, there was one other thing we found through the spirit box. The timing came through for me when I was listening to it was like midnight. So we went downstairs, it was 11 o'clock, and we thought, well, just hang out here. We're going to continue trying to make communication and see if what happens at midnight, see if that is an indicator of what was supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. And when there was at one point I said, I feel Native American. I don't know if there's a Native American kind of interest or connection. And I think it was at that point when Beau was like, they're here, he's here. I'm like, who's here? Who is here? And I wanted to put this, she's like, it's right behind you. And I just want to say, before I go further, Beau got us these amazing t-shirts. And Beau, do you remember the one that she got me? I don't know if that's backwards. It's right behind me, isn't it?
No, that's perfect.
That was like insane. So anyways, share that. When she said that, I could feel like a weight around me. And then from head to toe, my body got lit up. I've had goosebumps and I've had those soul shivers before, and I know what that feels like, but this was something really different. Head to toe, vibrations, not just goosebumps, but my whole body lit up. I was frozen and I could feel tears coming through my eyes. I didn't cry, but I felt like I wanted to cry. But I was frozen solid and I couldn't move with this body lit up. I knew I could I knew everyone was there, but everyone was kind of like very like faded, which is really strange. So I just sat there, and I remember both saying, what are you seeing? What are you feeling? And the only thing I feel like I could say was wind. And I felt blowing wind. So I sat there for what felt like 20 minutes, but I went back to my recording, and it was like that. Like, well, no, it was more than that. But it felt like it was 20 minutes where I sat there in that energy. And it's a loving energy, emotional loving energy. It was so wonderful. And then all of a sudden it was gone. And I was like, well, let's do the spirit box again. It was almost like what happened? It was like disconnected completely.
That is just so fascinating. And what's interesting is I think you're bringing up a really good point on the human time, the way we experience time and time frames too, because time being linear, we don't realize how long something can take. And I know Carissa had something that she wanted to say.
I didn't even make the connection. She got the shirt, but the Earth Keeper was behind her, and she felt wind. And then at the hotel, wind woke her up at 2:22. So when we had a podcast about synchronicities, and when there's just too many of them, you can't deny it.
You can't. It's all linked together. But yeah, I mean, speaking to again that also that linear time experience, it's just tells you how cool it is that we can experience things differently than others do, even with time. So please continue.
Yeah. So after that happened, and it was around midnight when this all took place. And after that, like, it felt different. It felt different. It felt like we were sitting around a table playing cards, just playing around. And which brings me back to something I forgot to talk about. We did a tarot card pull, and which was really interesting because the card that I had was the Tower. And I also pulled the Six of Cups. So for me, the Tower this is ending tonight. There was a feeling of an ending. And then with the Six of Cups, the feeling that I felt was that I had been here before. I mean, I had never been there physically before, but it felt like this felt familiar. So after everything, it was very clear. It was very clean. It was not scary. And we just bundled up the house with a bunch of love, locked the door, and said thank you, and we left.
How beautiful is that?
Yeah.
So I want to ask you the same question actually that I asked Bo in our previous episode, and that is, did you have any experiences in regards to the Sallie House after you left?
Okay, so not really that night. I kind of went back to the hotel, passed out, and felt fine. But when I got home, now my husband was out of town and I was alone, so I'm not sure if that has anything to do with the fear, but fear started to settle in when I went to bed at night. And when I went to bed, I shut the lights out, and it's dark in our room. But what I felt was a click, and I felt like a heavy drape took all the light that, like, whatever should be flashing, like a TV light or a power light, it was pitch black in my room. And I stepped into that moment of fear for just a few minutes. And I'm like, nope. I went straight to ground, clear, protect. I placed all the love around me, and that fear just disappeared. But that did happen. And it was the weirdest thing. Like I said, I went to bed, I turned my lights off, I could see lights, then all of a sudden a blanket it was just blanket dark. It's so dark that when you open your eyes, it hurts. And I'm like, what is that? But
Interestingly, not obviously, it has nothing to do with the Sallie House, but when I was a child and I was opening up initially, I experienced something like that. I remember standing outside of a door. I was sleeping over a friend's house, and she was in the bathroom, and she closed the door, and I was standing outside. So there was a light around the door, and it was like that blanket was put over, and I was terrified. So I have experienced something similar.
yeah, it was intense. And like I said, I listened to your podcast, your fear podcast. But yeah, I just placed that love around me, and all good. And I haven't had anything since.
I'm glad to hear that. And I'm actually going to open the floor to Carissa and Michelle to ask you questions or add on to your story.
Well, I've been listening and I'm like, oh, this is so wonderful because there were so many synchronicities. But I've taken a moment to sit down and write down everything that happened related to Perry. His name was Perry Edward Smith. The case we were talking about is one that Truman Capote actually wrote about in the book In Cold Blood, which I had never read, never heard of, and it was the Clutter Family Murders. And so since leaving the house, I have done a deep dive, and there's several things that tie back to the case and to this experience in the house. I do want to say, like, when a piece comes through for me where it feels connected, I'm not going to say it has a glow around it. I don't know how to explain it. I just know it's connected. And I know when I'm reading things and looking at things that it's connected and it's feeding back into the story. So I can kind of share everything that kind of came through that led us down the path that it was actually Perry that we were speaking with. Carissa had the feeling of Perry, and so much of what she said is his personality. He's very, I don't even know how to put it into words. Like, I have them all written down here, but he's sensitive. He could appear to others to be like deeply introspective. He's charming. He's disarming. He's got a sense of humor. He distracts. Those are the words that I've read about him. They're similar to the words that Carissa was saying in the house. She, as I said in the last episode, went over to the door frame. She stood like he was standing and said, "This is what I see," much concentration on the boots. So I have my notes here. I'm going to read them so I don't forget anything. So while we were in the house, we decided that it was Perry Smith Edward based on the fact of Carissa's description. I started looking at serial killers and this piece glowed through. So we looked into him a little bit more. Immediately, the boots became a factor in the fact that he was caught after picking them up in Las Vegas, Nevada. That became a huge thing for me because I had just flown in from Las Vegas, Nevada. So these are the pieces that are starting to come together. We find out at that time that one of the victims' name was Bonnie. We knew that in the house. There was a magnet on the refrigerator that said Las Vegas, and coming through the spirit box were so many brutal words about crime and hurting and talking about a leg injury, which Perry did have a leg injury. So those are the things that happened while we were in the house. And as we leave the house, like in the next 24 hours, we have a chance to deep dive into the internet. And again, we find out that not only is his victim's name Bonnie, but he committed the murders on her birthday. And two of the other dates tied back to dates to me. He used to live in Alaska. He got caught in Las Vegas. Those both tie back to me because I bounce between the two areas that seem significant. They were suspected of a murder in Sarasota, Florida. Bonnie, I-41, she explained that already. So that is all the stuff coming through there. Now, Bo had said when we left the house that in the next 48 hours, we'll probably get confirmation that this was who it was in one way or another. So I'm at the airport. I get triggered back to convincing Carissa to come on this, or when she started to consider it. We were having dinner at a restaurant called Perry's. So I'm like, okay, very interesting. Let me look at my notes. When I landed in Vegas, there was on my phone a picture of Sarasota, Florida, which I never typed in Sarasota, Florida. When I was walking through the airport, there was a big sign that said Truman. The book was written by Truman Capote. And let's see what else it says. Yeah, there's and I was watching a show, and one of the characters who's never been on the show before, his name was Perry too. So all these little things are coming through. That was coming through for me. That is the same night that Bo stayed in Garden City. Where were we? Kansas, Garden City, Kansas, and had that experience with the wind at 2:22 a.m. Interestingly enough, Garden City is only 8 miles away from where the murders took place in Holcomb, Kansas. They took place between the night of the 14th, the morning of the 15th, and probably about the time she heard the wind is when it would have been completing. I mean, just as a side fact, but we didn't know that's where she was. I reached out to her a couple of days later. I'm like, well, where did you stay? And it ended up being there. So that all comes back. The county that they were tried in is Finney County. The courthouse they were convicted in is Finney Courthouse, which the owner of the Sallie House, the original owners, their last name was Finney also. So it ties back there. They were in prison just about 31 miles from Atchison. And yeah, I'm trying to think of all the other things that came back. They were buried once. They had to be exhumed to test for DNA for the crime in Florida. And also their bodies were moved. That's a big part of Atchison's history too, like graveyards being moved, bodies being exhumed and then reburied. So that's all before I read In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. And the few things that came through right there is Perry's charm. He's very charming, much to the fact that Truman Capote, I don't know if you want to say fell in love with him, but had special feelings towards Perry, his charm. So Truman Capote's book In Cold Blood was the first nonfiction book ever written about crime, which I didn't know. Again, I never had heard of this case before. So I found that interesting. In the book, they speak about the winds that came up during the middle of the night that muted the sounds next door. I found that interesting. They did say that Perry, according to some, had mediumistic qualities. He could like tell situations that were going to happen. He sang songs about parrots. One thing we didn't share is as soon as we walked into the Sallie House, there was a parrot that kept going off. So I found that very interesting. There was a 4-year-old boy. He was one of the victims in Sarasota. I'm not saying that's who was in the house, but that age ties back. And one other thing, when we left the Sallie House to go to dinner, when we came back, I caught a picture and it looks like there's a flashlight showing through the window, but nobody was in there. And in the book, it does speak about before they left the Clutter home that they opened the blinds and were looking out the blinds. So that kind of ties back too. So there was a lot of stuff, but those are kind of all the things that came back into this nice, tidy package that said that's who it was. And it just felt very supportive.
It speaks to like that significant connection though. I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah. And a month after the fact, Bo was back in Kansas City on a drive across the country. And I was staying in a hotel right next to a Holiday Inn, exactly a month after the fact. And that's where we stayed in Atchison. So that felt like it tied back. And when I was driving home the other day, I was listening to a podcast, totally unrelated, but they mentioned the Clutter family murders in that podcast. So
I love it.
There's a lot. I'm sorry. I'm passionate about this stuff. I just ramble.
That is great research, writing it all down. I totally forgot about all that stuff. And it's almost like we were getting breadcrumbs that led us to the house. I forgot about the steakhouse.
The entire time, I feel like you guys were getting breadcrumbs. And how cool is it to be able to step into it from like the psychic investigative piece? Like, I just think that's amazing.
And that's interesting that people thought he was, I think you said, a medium. Because remember in the room, I was like, what the hell, man? He's acting like we're kind of the same. We're similar. And I'm like, no, dude. And I wonder now if that was part of that piece.
It really could have been. And I want to go back quickly too, to Bonnie saying like when she was in that moment with the Earthkeeper, how it felt like time stopped and everything fell away and she could just really be present in that moment. That's kind of what this whole experience has been. And I try to describe it to people who weren't there and they look at me and it's so anticlimactic. Really, they're just like, okay, but they weren't there. They didn't feel the energy of the draw to I don't even know the right words to say. And so when people then doubt me or say, okay, whatever, it kind of makes me feel bad. But then I have to remember they didn't experience that energetic component. They're hearing about it secondhand. But it was
not only that, but they're missing out because even from my perspective, I feel like I was there with you guys and I definitely was not. But hearing it, just having the opportunity to hear from all of the different perspectives, I can see Carissa chasing somebody with a Swiffer. I love it. So I just,
y'all are never gonna let that go, man.
Carissa,
Nope. I am going to restrain myself on our next house.
Oh, you're not.
you almost pushed me down those stairs into the basement.
Oh my God. I think I think someone said, why did you just climb over Bonnie? And I was like, oh shit, I did. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
love it. I'm gonna make sure that you always have Swiffers with you, like
I'm
regardless.
gonna have a
It gives me
glass of
boosts.
wine before or something.
Well, Bonnie, thank you for jumping in here and sharing your story. Where can our listeners find you and what do you do?
Well, first of all, I was happy to be here. Reliving this experience is awesome, and I can't wait for the next one. My business is called Spellbound Mystics. So you can go to spellboundmystics.com. I do mediumship readings, tarot readings. I also sell crystals. I do healing. If you're in Florida, I can teach some yoga. So there's a bunch of things on there if you need anything.
I love that. Well, thank you again. So I guess we'll wrap up.
Thank you to everybody who helped make this experience possible. I mean, I really did take everyone being there. Stacy, you've done such a wonderful job getting that whole story filled in. So thank you.
Well, I'm gonna wrap up and say stay classy.
Stay sassy.
Stay badassy.
Bye guys.